The firefighter pulled a wallet from the wreckage. Inside was a photo of two little girls and a note that would change everything. This is the story of Michael Torres, a man who lost his family in seconds, a community that refused to let him fall, and a miracle that no one saw coming. The next, everything is gone. Michael Torres knew this better than anyone, because on a cold November night in 2023, his entire world burned to the ground, literally. But this isn't just a story about loss. This is a story about what happens after, when the cameras leave, when the donations dry up, when you're left alone with your grief. And somehow, you have to find a reason to keep going. Michael Torres was 36 years old, a high school history teacher, coach of the junior varsity basketball team. He lived in a modest two-story house on Maple Street with his wife Elena and their two daughters, 7-year-old Sofia and 4-year-old Isabella. They were his everything. Elena was a nurse at Riverside Hospital. She worked night shifts 3 times a week. On her nights off, they'd have family game nights. Sofia always won at Uno. Isabella always cheated. Michael would pretend not to notice. Those were the best nights. The nights when everything felt perfect, when he didn't know how lucky he was. That November night started like any other. Elena kissed the girls goodbye before her shift. Michael helped Sofia with her math homework. He read Isabella a bedtime story. Then he tucked them both in, told them he loved them, closed their bedroom door, and went downstairs to grade papers. By midnight, he was exhausted. He decided to go to bed. He checked the front door, made sure it was locked, turned off the lights, and headed upstairs. He never made it to his bedroom. At 12:17 a.m., Michael smelled smoke. He ran to the kitchen. Flames were crawling up the walls. The old wiring in the house had finally given out, something they'd been meaning to fix, but never got around to. Now it was too late. Michael grabbed his phone, called 911. Then he ran upstairs. The smoke was already thick, black and suffocating. He burst into the girls' room. Sofia was coughing. Isabella was unconscious. He grabbed both of them, tried to carry them down the stairs, but the smoke was too much. He could barely see, could barely breathe. He made it to the front door, but it was jammed. The heat had warped the frame. He kicked it once, twice, nothing. The fire was roaring behind him. His lungs were burning. His daughters were limp in his arms. He stumbled to the living room window, broke it with his elbow, and threw Sofia through. Then Isabella. He heard neighbors screaming, running toward his house. He tried to climb through the window, but the smoke had gotten to him. His legs gave out. He collapsed. The last thing he remembered was the ceiling collapsing and everything going black. Michael woke up 3 days later in the hospital. Burns on 40% of his body. Smoke inhalation. 3 broken ribs. But he was alive. The first thing he asked about was his daughters. The nurse couldn't look him in the eye. That's when he knew. Sofia had died on the lawn, too much smoke in her lungs. Isabella had died in the ambulance. Her little body couldn't take it. Elena had been called from the hospital. She arrived to find her home in ashes, and her daughters gone. She collapsed outside the emergency room, screaming until her voice gave out. The funeral was held a week later. 2 small white coffins, side by side. Michael could barely stand. His burns were still healing. Elena held him up, but she was barely holding herself together. The church was packed. Students, teachers, neighbors, people who had only heard about the tragedy. Everyone cried, but no one cried like Michael and Elena. They had buried their children, their reason for living, their entire future, and now they had to figure out how to survive. The weeks after the funeral were the darkest. Michael couldn't go back to work, couldn't look at his students without thinking of Sofia, couldn't coach basketball without remembering how Isabella would sit in the bleachers, cheering for the team even though she had no idea what was happening. Elena couldn't go back to the hospital. Every child she saw reminded her of her daughters. Every mother reminded her of what she'd lost. They stayed in a hotel for 2 weeks, paid for by the Red Cross. Then they moved into a small apartment. Donated furniture, donated clothes. Everything they owned was gone. But that didn't matter, because their daughters were gone too. Insurance covered some of the costs. A GoFundMe raised $20,000. People were generous. People cared. But money couldn't fix what was broken. Money couldn't bring back Sofia and Isabella. Money couldn't stop the nightmares, or the panic attacks, or the crushing guilt that never went away. Michael blamed himself every single day. Why didn't he fix the wiring? Why didn't he get them out faster? Why did he survive when his daughters didn't? Elena blamed herself too. Why wasn't she home that night? Why did she take that shift? Why couldn't she save them? Their marriage started to crack, not because they didn't love each other, but because their grief was too heavy, too overwhelming. They couldn't carry it together. They could barely carry it alone. By Christmas, they were barely speaking. Michael spent his days in silence, staring at the wall, reliving that night over and over. Elena threw herself into therapy, trying desperately to find a way forward. But there was no way forward, not without their daughters. Then, on New Year's Eve, something happened. Michael received a phone call from a firefighter named James Chen, the man who had pulled him from the burning house. James said he had something that belonged to Michael, something he'd found in the wreckage. Michael's wallet. It had survived somehow, protected by a metal toolbox in the garage. James asked if Michael wanted it back. Michael said yes. They met at a coffee shop the next day. James handed him the wallet. Leather, burned around the edges, but mostly intact. Michael opened it. His driver's license was there, a few credit cards, and in the photo slot, a picture of Sofia and Isabella, smiling, happy, alive. Michael broke down. Right there in the coffee shop, James sat with him. Didn't say anything, just sat. Sometimes that's all you can do. After Michael composed himself, James said something that would change everything. He said he understood what Michael was going through, because 10 years ago, James had lost his son, a car accident. The other driver was drunk. His son was only 8 years old. James said he almost didn't survive the grief. He almost gave up. But then he became a firefighter. He couldn't save his son, but maybe he could save someone else's, and that's what kept him going. The idea that his pain could have purpose. Michael listened, really listened, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than despair. He felt hope, not a lot, just a flicker, but it was something. James gave Michael his phone number, told him to call anytime, day or night. Michael thanked him and went home to Elena. He told her about the meeting, about James and his son, about the idea that maybe their pain could mean something. Elena cried. But for the first time, they weren't tears of only sadness. They were tears of possibility. That night, they talked for hours, really talked. For the first time since the fire, they talked about Sofia and Isabella, about the memories they had, about the love that would never die, and they made a decision. They would start a foundation in their daughters' names to help families affected by house fires, to provide smoke detectors, fire safety education, financial support for families who lost everything. They couldn't bring their daughters back, but maybe they could save someone else's. The Sofia and Isabella Torres Foundation launched in March with the leftover GoFundMe money and donations from their community. They started small, installing smoke detectors in low-income housing, teaching fire safety at elementary schools, providing emergency funds to families in crisis. Michael went back to teaching, but he also volunteered at the foundation. Every weekend, every evening, it gave him purpose. Elena went back to nursing. Part-time at first, then full-time. She also volunteered at the foundation, helping families navigate the trauma of loss. Because she understood it, she lived it every day. The foundation grew. By the end of the first year, they had installed over 500 smoke detectors, taught fire safety to 3,000 kids, helped 25 families rebuild their lives. By the second year, they had doubled that. Local news stations covered their story. Michael and Elena were invited to speak at conferences, to share their experience, to inspire others who had lost loved ones. They didn't feel like heroes. They felt like survivors, just trying to make sense of the senseless. On the 3rd anniversary of the fire, they held a memorial at the site where their house once stood. It was now an empty lot, covered in grass. 2 oak trees had been planted, one for Sofia, one for Isabella. Hundreds of people showed up. Students Michael had taught, families the foundation had helped, strangers who had been moved by their story. James Chen was there too, the firefighter who saved Michael's life, and in a way, saved his soul. Michael stood in front of the crowd, Elena by his side, and he spoke. He talked about his daughters, about the light they brought into the world, about how that light didn't die with them. It lived on, in every family they helped, in every life they saved. In every child who learned to check their smoke detector. Sofia and Isabella's legacy wasn't tragedy. It was hope. It was action. It was love that refused to die. The crowd was silent. Many were crying. Michael finished his speech, and he looked at the two oak trees, still small, but growing, just like him and Elena, still healing, but growing. Today, the Sofia and Isabella Torres Foundation operates in 12 cities. They've installed over 10,000 smoke detectors, educated 50,000 children on fire safety, helped hundreds of families rebuild after devastating fires. Michael and Elena are still married, still grieving, but also still living, still loving, still honoring their daughters every single day. They'll never get over losing Sofia and Isabella. That's not how grief works. You don't get over it. You learn to carry it. And if you're lucky, you find a way to turn it into something beautiful, something meaningful, something that makes the world a little bit safer, a little bit kinder, a little bit brighter. That's what Michael and Elena did. They took the worst night of their lives, and they turned it into a mission, a purpose, a legacy, because that's what love does. It doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It finds new ways to exist, new ways to matter, and sometimes, if you're really lucky, it saves lives. Not just the lives of strangers, but your own life too. Michael still carries that wallet, the one James gave him, with a photo of his daughters inside. He looks at it every day, and he remembers not just the tragedy, but the joy, the laughter, the love. And he knows that Sofia and Isabella are still with him. In every smoke detector they install, in every family they help, in every life they save, they're still here, still making a difference, still lighting up the world, just like they always did. If this story touched you, consider hitting that subscribe button, because these are the stories that remind us why we keep going.